There is a very specific, heavy silence that falls in a high-rise corporate office right before a disaster. It is the kind of quiet where the office white noise seems to vanish. The hum of the air conditioning grows louder, and you can hear the faint squeak of expensive leather shoes on polished concrete. That was the exact silence in the corner office on a gray, rainy Friday afternoon in Manhattan. I was sitting in a low chair, looking across a massive desk at Julian Vance, the 34-year-old CEO of Aegis Systems. He was wearing custom designer sneakers that cost more than my first car, and he had a bright, rehearsed smile that did not reach his cold eyes. Julian was tapping a heavy gold Mont Blanc pen against his teeth. Click, click, click. He thought he was in total control of the room. He thought he was about to make a minor routine administrative adjustment. He had no idea he was pulling the pin on a grenade he was holding. "Lawrence," he began, using that soft, patronizing tone that corporate executives reserve for laying off long-term staff or explaining technology to their grandparents. "You know we are pivoting. We are restructuring our entire operations to align with our upcoming strategic transaction. We need to be lean and agile. We are trimming the fat to let the muscle breathe." I did not blink. I sat there in my charcoal suit, my hands folded calmly in my lap. I had spent 15 years as the corporate secretary and compliance director of this company, and I knew exactly what that tone meant. It was the prelude to a corporate robbery. Julian pushed a single sheet of paper across the desk. It was a formal notice of equity cancellation, printed on thick, heavy bond paper. "The board and I have been looking at the capitalization table," Julian said, leaning back in his Herman Miller chair. "Frankly, the legacy advisory options his father, Gordon Vance, had granted to me 12 years ago were clogging the cap table." "We are a family here, Lawrence," Julian said, using the word that always tasted like battery acid, "and families make sacrifices. We are canceling these legacy options effective immediately to clear the deck. We will keep you on salary for a 3-month transition period, of course. We are not monsters," he smiled, expecting me to plead, to raise my voice, or to sign the paper in a panic. He saw me as a minor bureaucratic relic, the quiet compliance officer who took notes at board meetings and updated the employee handbook. He saw an old man who could be easily discarded. He did not see the architect who had built the legal foundation of the entire company. I did not touch the pen. I did not look at the paper. I just stared at him. "Is this your final decision, Julian?" I asked, keeping my voice flat and even. "Yes, it is," Julian said, his smile tightening. "It is just business." I stood up, smoothing my jacket. "I will get back to work then," I said. I walked out, closing his glass door with a soft, quiet click. I walked past the open-plan workspaces where young employees played ping-pong and drank expensive coffee. They did not look at me. I was invisible to them, a ghost in a suit. I walked down the hall and took the service elevator down to the basement annex near the server room. That was where Julian had relocated my desk 6 months ago, claiming they needed my former office for a wellness zone. It was cold in the annex, filled with the steady hum of cooling servers and stacked boxes of old documents. I sat at my desk and opened my personal laptop. I did not log into the company network. I opened an encrypted offline database. Julian thought he had just deleted a minor liability from his capitalization table. He was preparing to sell Aegis Systems to a massive conglomerate called Nova Enterprises for $400,000. He had spent 8 months negotiating the deal, and he was desperate to keep the capitalization table clean to avoid any questions from the buyer. But Julian had made a fatal mistake. He had never read the original corporate charter, the bylaws, or the amended shareholder agreements. He had never looked at the paperwork his father, Gordon, had signed when the company was on the brink of collapse 12 years ago. I looked at the digital copy of the agreement on my screen. The original was safe in my fireproof vault at home. The document was a hybrid advisory agreement that contained a specific loyalty clause. A clause that Julian had completely ignored because he did not believe a compliance officer could pose a threat. I felt a cold, calm sensation settle over me. Julian wanted to play games with the equity. He wanted to claim that we were a family. That was fine. We would play by the rules his father and I had established, and I was going to show him exactly who owned the house. I checked the system log. The digital trail was clear. I was ready to wait for the right moment. The signing of the 400,000 acquisition was scheduled for next Thursday. That gave me exactly 6 days to play the part of the defeated, compliant employee who was quietly packing his boxes. 6 days for Julian to get comfortable in his lies. I shut down my computer, packed my leather bag, and walked out into the rain. To understand why Julian Vance was making a monumental mistake, you have to go back to the beginning of Aegis Systems. You have to look past the modern glass offices, the polished marble tables, and the espresso machines that cost more than a decent family sedan. You have to go back to when the company was just 5 people crammed into a damp basement office in Queens that smelled of mildew, cheap pizza, and desperation. It was exactly 12 years ago. Gordon Vance, the founder and Julian's father, called my home phone at 3 a.m. I was working as a junior partner at a mid-sized corporate law firm at the time, burning my life away 1 hour at a time. Gordon's voice was a rough whisper, sounding like gravel in a blender. "Lawrence, I am finished," he said. "The Securities and Exchange Commission is sniffing around our Series A round. The primary investors are pulling their term sheets. I cannot pay the office rent. I cannot pay the utility bills. I cannot pay the lawyers, and I certainly cannot pay you." I should have hung up the phone. I should have gone back to sleep and let Gordon's chaotic dream die the quick death it probably deserved. But Gordon had a strange, infectious energy. He was a brilliant mess of a man, and he had helped me when I was starting my legal career. I got out of bed and told him I was coming over. When I arrived at the Queen's basement, the place looked like a disaster zone. Papers were scattered across the floor, and there were unopened tax notices from the IRS piled on a folding table. Gordon was sitting on a plastic crate, staring at a spreadsheet like a man who had looked into the abyss and received a tax audit in return. And in the corner of the room sat Julian. He was 22 years old then, supposedly an intern. He was wearing massive, noise-canceling headphones, completely engrossed in playing video games on his phone. He did not care that his family's future was about to vanish. He gave me a brief, blank look, nodded, and went right back to his screen. That was the dynamic. Gordon panicked, Julian ignored, and I fixed. For 6 months, I did not sleep more than 4 hours a night. I lived on cold coffee and sheer determination. I rebuilt the entire corporate structure of Aegis Systems from the ground up. I drafted standard service agreements, cleaned up the messy accounting logs, fought off the aggressive tax auditors, and negotiated payment plans with creditors who were ready to sue us into oblivion. I was the silent janitor of their corporate house, scrubbing the dirt off their ledger until the company looked clean enough for real venture capitalists. When the storm finally passed and the company was saved, there was still no money. Aegis Systems had survived, but it had 0 cash reserves. Gordon sat me down on a folding chair in the empty hallway. "Lawrence, I cannot pay your invoices," he said, looking exhausted. His eyes were bloodshot and his hands were shaking. "I know, Gordon," I replied, "but I can give you this," he said. He pushed a document across the table. It was an amended, restated convertible advisory agreement. It was a complex protective legal instrument. "It is Class B advisory shares," Gordon explained. "But I had my lawyer include a specific conversion clause. A poison pill. If the company fails to pay dividends for 24 consecutive months, or if the board of directors fails to meet for a full fiscal year, these shares convert." "Davut to what?" I asked, studying the legal wording. "Voting stock," Gordon whispered. "Super voting stock at a 10-to-1 ratio. If I ever lose control, or if the vultures try to freeze us out and stop paying us, this is the trigger. You become the ultimate safeguard, Lawrence." I looked at Julian in the corner, still useless, still staring at his phone. Then I looked at Gordon, who was trusting me with the survival of his legacy. I signed the contract. We notarized it right there in the basement. I filed it in the physical state records, and I kept a notarized original copy in my personal safe at home. As the years passed, Aegis Systems grew into a major market player. Gordon grew old and eventually stepped back, taking a symbolic chairman role. Julian took over as CE. Julian, who only cared about short-term metrics. Julian, who saw my title of corporate secretary and assumed I was a glorified clerk. He never looked at the historic filings from the Queen's basement. He did not know about the conversion clause, but the clock had been ticking. Condition 1. The company had never paid a single dividend. Julian preferred to reinvest every dollar into marketing and his personal expense accounts. That was 12 years of non-payment. Condition 2. The board of directors had not held a certified meeting in 3 years. Julian hated formal meetings. He replaced them with casual team retreats in Colorado. Under Delaware General Corporation law, those retreats did not meet the requirements of a certified board meeting. The conversion had happened silently and automatically 3 years ago. According to the document in my safe, I did not just hold worthless advisory options. I controlled 52.4% of the voting power of the entire corporation. Julian was strutting around like a king, completely unaware that I held the deed to his kingdom. Invisibility in the corporate world is a slow, gradual process. It does not happen overnight. It is like soil erosion. First, they stop inviting you to strategic lunch meetings. Then, you find yourself left off the email threads for high-level projects. Finally, they move your physical desk. 6 months before Julian Vance called me into his office to cancel my options, they relocated me. I used to have an office next to the executive suite, a strategic location where I could hear decisions in real time. Then, one Monday morning, I arrived to find my belongings packed into boxes. We are creating a collaborative wellness space for the developers, the office manager, a 22-year-old named Chloe Ward, told me with a vapid smile. So, we are moving you to the basement annex. It is quieter down there, better for your work. The annex was a glorified storage room near the server racks. It was constantly cold, and it hummed with the loud, steady noise of cooling fans keeping terabytes of company data from overheating. It was the place where they put things they did not want to look at: broken office chairs, outdated marketing banners, and me. I became a ghost in my own company. I would walk to the break room to get tea, and people would look right through me. The new hires did not even know my name. One afternoon, a young man named Braden Cole stopped me near the elevator. He was wearing an expensive padded vest over a designer t-shirt and holding a skateboard. He was the newly appointed VP of brand evangelism. "Hey you," he said, snapping his fingers in my face. "You are in HR operations, right? The toilet on the 4th floor is clogged. Someone tried to flush a salad. You should get on that." I stared at him. I was wearing a tailored suit and carrying a leather binder containing the details of our corporate compliance records. "I am the corporate secretary, Braden," I said, my voice cold. Right. HR, facilities, whatever." He laughed, already looking back at his phone. "Just find a plunger. It smells bad in there." He walked away. I did not find a plunger. Instead, I went back to my basement desk and added his name to my digital list. Braden Cole, VP of Brand Evangelism, vest holder, and future unemployed person. But my invisibility had a massive hidden benefit. When people think you are just part of the furniture, they speak freely in front of you. They leave sensitive documents on the printer, and they forget you have admin credentials to the shared drives. That was how I saw the actual numbers of the company. Julian was rushing the sale to Nova Enterprises. The rumors of a $400 million acquisition were true, but the valuation was based on a lie. Our earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization needed to look incredible. In reality, they were mediocre, so Julian was getting creative with the accounting. I watched the files update on the secure servers in real time. I saw the adjusted spreadsheets. Julian was moving day-to-day operational expenses into capital expenditures to artificially inflate our profits. He was counting projected future revenue as already recognized income. It was classic, sloppy accounting fraud, the kind of manipulation that works for a single quarter until an actual auditor looks under the hood. I sat in my cold basement corner, wrapped in a heavy scarf, watching the digital trail of lies grow. "You are getting sloppy, Julian," I whispered to my screen. He was bypassing compliance checks. He was ignoring data protection rules. He was skipping the board resolutions required for major financial decisions. Under the bylaws, those transactions technically required my signature, but Julian simply signed them himself or had his young general counsel, Owen Kelly, bypass the checks. Every day I saved a copy of everything, every altered invoice, every email thread where Julian pressured the finance team to make the numbers work, and every draft spreadsheet. They thought I was obsolete, a relic of his father's era. They did not realize that in a company built on paper lies, the person who keeps the archives is the most dangerous person in the building. It was now Wednesday, the day before the signing. I checked the files on the shared server. The acquisition due diligence folder was locked to standard employees, but my credentials as the corporate secretary were never revoked. I saw the folder labeled Project Chess. Inside was the final capitalization table that Julian was preparing to present to the legal team of Nova Enterprises. I opened the file, Cap Table d'Axles. I scrolled down to the shareholder registry. My heart gave a solid thump. Row 42 was my name, Lawrence Prescott. In the column for voting shares, the number was 0. Next to it, the status was marked, forfeited. Julian had not just threatened to cancel my advisory options. He had already gone into the cap table and deleted my shares. He had falsified the corporate records to show the buyers that all legacy options had been resolved and terminated. This was active securities fraud. Under the Securities Exchange Act of 1934 and Delaware General Corporation Law, presenting a falsified capitalization table to a buyer during a merger is a federal crime. He was lying to a 400 million buyer. I sat back in my chair. The hum of the server rack sounded like a countdown timer. I had all the evidence queued up on a secure external drive. I had the original 12-year-old advisory agreement, the bank record showing that 0 dividends had been paid for 12 years, and the corporate registry showing the lack of board meetings. My Class B shares had converted to Class A super voting shares 3 years ago. I held the majority voting interest. Julian was trying to sell a company he did not legally control, and he was lying about it on paper. On Tuesday afternoon, 2 days before the scheduled acquisition signing, Julian Vance decided to host what he called a pre-victory board briefing. It was not a real board meeting. A real board meeting required formal notice, detailed agendas, and corporate minutes certified by me. This was just a celebratory gathering in the main conference room with the 3 lead venture capital investors who were about to cash out their investments. I was not invited, of course. For Julian, I was already a terminated employee, but I was still technically employed during my transition period, and old habits die hard. Plus, the main conference room has floor-to-ceiling glass walls, and sound travels through the ventilation shafts perfectly if you stand in the adjoining copy room, but I did not stand in the copy room. I walked straight into the conference room, holding a tray of water bottles and glasses. It was a minor humiliation. Yes, a man with a law degree and 15 years of corporate experience playing waiter. But I needed to be in that room. I needed to see their faces and hear the exact words they used. "Lawrence," Julian said, his voice dripping with false friendliness when he saw me enter. He was wearing a tailored suit today, not his usual t-shirt and sneakers. He looked almost like a professional executive if you ignored the nervous energy vibrating off him. "Just set the tray down there." "Thanks." He turned back to the investors. 3 men in matching fleece vests and high-end running shoes sat around the marble table. "So," Julian said, gesturing to the slide deck on the screen, "the capitalization table is completely clean. We have resolved the legacy issues. The option pool is optimized for the acquisition. The buyer, Nova Enterprises, is ready to wire the funds on Thursday morning. And what about the founder's stock?" One of the investors, a man named Harvey Jenkins, asked, glancing at his tablet. "Gordon Vance's stake?" "My father is fully on board," Julian said, waving his hand dismissively. "He is in Florida playing golf. He just wants his cash payout. He is not involved in operations anymore. I have his signed proxy right here." I smiled inwardly as I placed a glass of water on the table. I knew Gordon Vance. He never gave proxies, especially not to his son. He was old school and believed in signing documents with his own hand. "What about the legacy compliance specialist?" Harvey Jenkins asked, looking briefly at me. "He was referring to me, Held," Julian replied, his voice dropping slightly. "We offered a generous severance package. The legacy options were retired. It is a non-issue. Retired like an old horse, I thought." I arranged the glasses on the table, checked the coasters, and stood in the background. I was completely invisible to them. "Excellent," Harvey Jenkins said, leaning back. "Because Nova Enterprises has a brutal legal team. If their lawyers find a single discrepancy in our cap table, they will cancel the transaction, or at least cut the valuation by 20% just to punish us." "There are no issues," Julian insisted, striking the table with his hand. "We run a tight ship. We are fully transparent and ready." He picked up a water bottle and raised it. To the exit event, gentlemen, the investors cheered and clinked their glasses. I stood by the door, holding the empty wooden tray. My face was a mask of polite service, but my mind was computing the scale of their mistake. They were celebrating a massive transaction based on a document that was a legal fiction. Julian looked at me for a brief second, and I saw a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. Perhaps he realized that I was cooperating too easily. "You can go, Lawrence," he said. "Enjoy the meeting, gentlemen," I replied, and walked out. As I headed down the hall, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a text message from Gordon Vance. "Lawrence, Julian tells me you are leaving the firm. What is happening?" I stopped in the hallway. I could tell him everything right now. But Gordon was 74 years old and had a heart condition. If I told him over a text message, he might confront Julian immediately, tipping our hand and allowing Julian to destroy the evidence. I typed a careful reply, "Just a restructuring, Gordon. Do not worry. I am managing the paperwork. Meet me in the lobby on Thursday at 7:50 a.m. The signing is at 8. He replied immediately, "I will be there. I hate these corporate signings. I need you to review the final documents for me." I smiled. "I am already reviewing them, Gordon," I thought. On Wednesday night, the day before the transaction, I called Gordon on a secure line. He was at his hotel in Manhattan, having just flown in. He sounded tired and anxious. "Lawrence, Julian says the transaction is a done deal," Gordon said. "Why do I feel like something is wrong?" "Because Julian has committed securities fraud, Gordon," I said quietly. "He has falsified the capitalization table and deleted my majority voting shares. He is presenting a fraudulent document to Nova Enterprises." There was a long silence on the phone. I could hear Gordon's heavy breathing. "The idiot," he finally whispered. "His arrogance has blinded him. He thinks because he ignored the contract, it does not exist. He is going to sign the purchase agreement tomorrow, Gordon. If he does, he faces federal prosecution. We need to stop him, but we must save the company. I have my original copy of the agreement in my briefcase," Gordon said, his voice turning firm, "the one we signed in the basement. I never travel without it. Meet me in the lobby. We will end this." On Thursday morning, a thunderstorm rolled over Manhattan. I stood in the lobby at 7:50 a.m., sharp, wearing a navy blue power suit. I was no longer the ghost in the basement annex. I was the majority shareholder of Aegis Systems. Gordon Vance walked through the revolving doors on time. He looked older, walking with a cane, but his eyes were sharp. He patted his leather briefcase. "I have the original agreement, Lawrence," he said. "Let us go." In the penthouse, the office was decorated with flowers for the acquisition celebration. Julian Vance stood by the window, adjusting his tie. When he saw me behind his father, his face darkened. "Lawrence, what are you doing here?" Julian snapped. "We are starting the signing in 5 minutes. We do not need non-essential personnel." "He is with me, Julian," Gordon said, his voice quiet but absolute. "Sit down in the boardroom, Julian." His general counsel, Owen Kelly, and Gordon sat on one side of the marble table. On the other side was the Nova Enterprises legal team, led by Vivian Adler. I stood in the corner. Vivian Adler opened her binder. "We are queued for the 400,000 wire," she said. "However, our compliance search flagged a historic UCC, filing from 12 years ago, referencing a Class B convertible agreement. We do not see its termination in the data room." Julian laughed, a high-pitched, nervous sound. "That is just ancient history, Vivian. It was cancelled. It is a non-issue. Right, Owen?" Owen Kelly shifted in his seat, sweating. "Yes, retired," he mumbled. "Do you have a signed release?" Vivian Adler asked. "If this agreement converted, it is a controlling interest. Selling the company without consent is void ab initio. Presenting a falsified ledger violates California Penal Code Section 470 for forgery and constitutes federal fraud." "There is no majority owner besides my father and me," Julian insisted, slamming his hand on the table. "The cap table is clean." I took 3 steps forward. My shoes clicked loudly on the floor. "That would be me," I said. Julian spun around. "Lawrence, get out. You do not own anything." I opened my folder on the table. "I am the holder, and I never signed a release," I told Vivian. "Here is the original agreement signed by Gordon, bank records proving 0 dividends for 12 years, and affidavits showing the board has not met for 3 years. I looked at Julian. "Under Clause 7.2 of the agreement, my Class B shares automatically converted to Class A supervoting shares at a 10-to-1 ratio exactly 3 years ago." I hold 52.4% of the voting interest in this corporation. The room went dead silent. The air conditioning hummed. Vivian Adler picked up my document, scanning the pages. She looked at the signature, then at Gordon Vance. Gordon, is this document valid? She asked. Yes, Gordon said, staring straight ahead. Lawrence owns the controlling interest. He always has. Vivian Adler closed her binder with a click. She turned to me. Lawrence, are you the majority shareholder? I am, I replied. Then why are we talking to him? She asked, gesturing toward Julian. I have no idea, I said. I walked to the head of the table. Julian, you are in my chair, move. Julian looked like he had been struck. He looked at the investors, but they were staring at their phones. Harvey Jenkins, the lead investor, was sweating. He realized that if Nova Enterprises pulled out, his venture capital firm would lose millions. He stared at Julian with pure anger. Julian had lied to them too. Julian grabbed his briefcase, his face red. You will hear from my lawyers, he shouted. No, Julian, I said. This is corporate governance. Goodbye. He stormed out, slamming the heavy glass door. I sat down in the leather chair. The seat was still warm. I smoothed my jacket and looked at the Nova Enterprises team. Miss Adler, I apologize for the drama, I said. The former management was confused about the equity structure. Let us discuss the transaction. Is the deal on? Vivian Adler asked, looking amused. Yes, I said. The valuation of $400,000. Zeron is fair, but we are reinstating the employee option pool out of my shares. The staff who built this place will get their payouts. I am carving out the 10% pool, so they split 40,000 of the proceeds. And Julian? She asked. He remains a minority shareholder, I said. He will get his 10% cash payout, but he is removed from management immediately and barred from the board. Vivian Adler smiled and pulled out her pen. We can work with that, she said. We spent 4 hours finalizing the contract. I knew every line because I had written them. At 1 p.m., the signing was complete and the 400,000 wire was cleared. I walked Gordon to the elevator. You saved the company, Lawrence, he said. I just read the paperwork, Gordon, I replied. I went back to the corner office. I sat in the chair, adjusted the lumbar support, and shredded the notice of equity cancellation Julian had given me. I opened my laptop and sent a single email to all staff, subject, update regarding leadership and acquisition, to all staff, from Lawrence Prescott, CEO. The acquisition by Nova Enterprises is complete. Your jobs are secure, and your options are fully restored. We are a family here, and this time, Dad is in charge. Get back to work. I closed my laptop. Real power does not make a noise. It just reads the fine print.